start the new stuff.
Okay.
So, guys, if I ever ask you to show by hand standard deviation, first thing you have to do is find the mean. Then, it's the squares of the differences between each piece of data and the mean, and then we sum those up and divide by the number of pieces of data. And that's how you would show standard deviation by hand. Thank goodness for technology.
Yeah, for real.
That's right. Because this gets a little mundane. And then this is just explaining why 58 is an outlier, then the two different ways we could do it. So if we did it with the 3 standard deviations, we see that 57.27, anything outside of that, well, 58 is outside of that, makes it an outlier. So it's considered an outlier no matter which method we chose. All right, today is a lot of vocab. Now, luckily, we talked about most of it yesterday. All right, so data gathering. We talked about how the population refers to everything. It's the entire group. And yesterday, we also talked about that every 10 years in the United States, we try to get information from the entire population. And what do we call that? A census. Okay, well, that's what we call it. When we conduct a census, that means we're collecting information on every member of the population. We also talked about yesterday how a census is very costly and extremely time-consuming and usually ineffective because it's difficult to locate every member of the population. Now, so we have developed statistics where we use samples and we take that sample to make predictions on the population. And when we predict about a population given a sample, we call that an inference. All right, so that's our first paragraph of vocab. Yes, sir?
Wouldn't the cost be mostly because of transportation or due to what?
The cost for the census in the United States is multi-level because they have to pay people. Well, first of all, they send out forms. Well, not everybody fills them out. So if you don't fill them out and mail them back in, then someone comes to visit you. And if you're not there, what happens? They would have to come back. So it is very costly, very time consuming. People move. Sometimes people hide. And it's not all that accurate. Yeah. All right, now, a sample is a subset of the population. And when we look at a sample should be unbiased and representative of every member of the population. And the way we do that is to create a sample such that each member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen. That's our favorite. That's a random sample, where each member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen. Random samples are most likely to be representative of a population and are preferred over non-random samples. Now, here it states a convenience sample. Now, sometimes I give projects to my students when we get to a statistics unit, and I ask them to survey to collect data. But what happens mostly when I ask my students to survey is you end up in your third period and you're like, oh my goodness, I haven't done my survey questions for 6th period yet, and you turn to the 2 or 3 people around you. Well, that's your convenience sample, isn't it?
Oh, no.
There was no method to it. Those people were close, and they're the ones that got surveyed. Okay, or self-selected. Have you ever been through the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A and you have the winning receipt, and at the bottom of it, you have the option of going online and filling out a survey, and then it gives you a code for a free chicken sandwich. Okay, now, so they are surveying me when I do that, but I get to choose whether or not I fill out the survey. I self-selected myself. Now that's a combo, actually, and I'm very curious as to how they decide which person gets the chance of filling out the survey, because it's not on the bottom of every receipt, is it? not exactly sure what triggers it. And we'll talk about how all the different triggers that could cause that. Now, a biased sample is one that is not representative of the population. And with biased samples, we can have underrepresented groups and overrepresented groups. And when we create a sample that is biased, that's why I always read research to figure out how they did it. How did they create this sample? Because if you have an underrepresented group or an overrepresented group, it can sway the results. All right, when determining if a sample is biased or representative, ask yourself the following. What was the entire population of interest? So, if we want to know what the college plans of seniors at Starsmall High School are, our population would be Starsmall High School seniors. Now, was the sample created in such a way that every member of the population of interest had an equal likelihood of being selected? So was the random selection process used, such as every 10th senior selected from a class roster, starting at a random location? Okay? Were the members of the population automatically left out due to the survey process? So if a school directory is used to select participants, those who didn't send their information in would be an underrepresented group. Or were any members of the population more likely to participate than others? For example, our researcher surveys every 10th Starsmall High School senior that go to a UGA Georgia Tech info meeting. Now, if we were to actually do this, it might be easy for me to go to Mr. Campbell's AP Calc BC class. Would that be a representative sample of our seniors? No. No, it wouldn't, because not many of us don't either have interest in calculus at that level or may not make it to that level before we leave high school. All right, so what is a statistic? A statistic is a number that describes a sample versus a parameter is a number that describes a population. So statistic, sample. Sample, statistics. Parameter, population. Population, parameters. So a statistic describes a sample, a parameter, a population. All right, now, if we conduct a survey and we do it appropriately, and let's say we use a random sample and our group is representative, then it says we can take that survey results and infer it on the population. So let's say we checked all the boxes and we did a good job. And we surveyed 40 employees at a company and 18 said they were unhappy with their pay. Then to predict the total number of employees, what we would do is we would take this fraction and multiply it times the total.
That makes sense.
Okay? And that's what we could expect. Now on the back, more vocab. Some of this is new, some of this is not. So a survey, when do we use a survey? We want to study one or more characteristics of a group. The population is just the entire group. A sample is a subset or part of that population. Now, random sample is what we're hoping for, because with a random sample, every member has an equal chance of being selected. And once we do that random sample, we're hoping we do have a representative sample. And that's a sample that accurately reflects the population. Now, any biased sample just doesn't accurately reflect the entire population. So anything that does not accurately reflect the entire population would be a biased sample. Now, when we create our survey, biased questions are questions that encourage a particular response. And this is really hard for my math teacher. When I take a survey, I really feel like probably English teachers do when they're on Facebook and they want to correct everybody's incorrect grammar. When I get a survey and there are biased questions, I don't want to answer the questions. I want to correct them and turn them back and say, try again.
Oh,
Yeah, it's hard. So a biased question is a question that encourages a particular response. And whenever I fill out online surveys, if they have a part at the end for comments, I will enlighten them as to which questions were biased and therefore they should throw out that information. Alright, from my point of view. Simple random sample, this is our best one right here. This is where members are chosen using a method that gives everyone an equally likely chance of being selected.
Random.
Yes, and you know how sometimes when I assign you things, or when I assigned roles for the murder mystery, I used my random number generator.
QQQ.
I think it was you. Yeah, it was you. Okay, now, a stratified random sample. Sometimes this is helpful. It's when we have a population that's divided into distinct groups, and then members are selected from the group. For example, if we were finding a random sample of students from Starsmore High School, we could have you divided into freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Choose 4 freshmen, 4 sophomores, 4 juniors, and 4 seniors. That would be stratified. Okay? Cluster. This is when we get a whole group taken as a sample. So if I went to Mr. Campbell's AP Calculus BC class, that would be a cluster. And sometimes clusters are good. They can be. Sometimes clusters are not as good. So the example here is if a flight lands at the airport and you interview everyone on one plane as they exit the plane.
Yeah, you're not going to get every single one.
Nope. And you probably don't even have access to them.
You probably just get ran over.
Alright, systematic sample. This is where we follow a rule. So if we did every 3rd person or every 10th customer. Convenient sample, this is what's easiest for us. Only members who are easily accessible are chosen. The people in the area or the vicinity. And then self-selected, also known as voluntary response, is when you must volunteer to answer the survey. Okay, so most accurate would be a census. Almost always impractical. Very accurate, and my favorite, SRS, simple random sample. And stratified samples can be good. Cluster samples can be good. You have to be careful. Not very accurate, convenient samples or self-selected samples. And those self-selected are usually not accurate because most of the time, if I think service was okay, I don't bother filling out a survey. If I was, like, when you call Comcast at the end, would you mind taking a brief survey?
No.
Well, if the service was exceptional, sure, I want them to get an attaboy. Or if my service was terrible, terrible, I want somebody to know that too. But if it was mediocre, I'm like, I'm in a hurry, click. Okay? So self-selected, when I get to choose whether or not I want to answer a survey, so a lot of times that is not a good, representative, unbiased sample. Okay, so your homework is out of 2 pages in your textbook. It's not hard. This is just kind of thinking and classifying. But I want to talk about the extra credit opportunity. The extra credit opportunity. And that is where we're going to use Khan Academy and go back and revisit some basic building blocks for logarithms.
I'm done.
Okay? Now, I'm about to hand out a sheet. And those of you that are watching the video, come see me later and I'll explain it all to you.